That brings me to the court. Another thing that Roosevelt did for the common man, for the forgotten man, was that he appointed 8 men who believed in the egalitarian principles that he said were a fundamental prerequisite to being appointed to the Supreme Court. And the old court is here. You see some progressive figures, most notably Louis Brandeis, but you also see the 4 horsemen, such as George Sutherland here, and Pierce Butler, and Willis Vandervanter. There were 4 horsemen of the apocalypse who would vote against progressive legislation such as the New Deal had. And if you turn to the backside, you'll see exactly what they were striking down. The National Labor Relations Act, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, conservation, and finally, FDR had had enough. He said, look, I've won a great landslide in 1936, one of the greatest elections in American history, almost 61%. I'm the representative of the people, the tribune. Not the courts, they're the reactionary ones. They're the 9 old men who were stuck in the horse and buggy days. The 9 scorpions in the bottle, the ones who were out of step. And so secretly he concocted this court packing plan to appoint justices to the Supreme Court, an extra one for every justice 70 years of age or older who would not retire. Why? Publicly, he said, because they're old, because they're inefficient, they can't keep up. That was a lie. Brandeis, who was the oldest, he was the most progressive. He was clearly efficient. The issue wasn't efficiency, the question was ideology. And the Supreme Court seemed to be on the verge of getting rid of Social Security, the minimum wage, and other key parts of the New Deal. And that he could not abide. Pardon?
What year is this?
What year what? 1937. 1937. This is how it seemed. FDR wanted a yes man, and people were very, very upset with the court packing plan. By the way, nothing illegal about the court packing plan. Nothing illegal about it. Foolish? Yes. Unwise? Certainly. We've had as few as 5 Supreme Court justices, and we've had as many as 10. There's nothing sacrosanct about 9. But he was terribly unwise in trying to change the court with this plan that he devised in secret. Robert Jackson had been promised that he would become Chief Justice, but he was passed over. Why? Because FDR asked for the advice of Charles Evans Hughes, the Chief Justice at the time, and he asked for, he got the advice from Felix Frankfurter, and he concluded that Robert Jackson needed seasoning. As he told his son, Jackson did not have enough experience, and that's what Hughes was saying too. FDR appointed the most far-reaching court, most progressive court in American history. He elevated Harlan Fiske Stone to Chief Justice when Hughes stepped down, and then he named Hugo Black, who was a loyal New Deal senator from Alabama. It later came out that he had been a life member of the Ku Klux Klan. But a lot of people, even before that came out, some of his advisors, FDR's advisors, were saying, is this the best we can do? Hugo Black from Birmingham? Of course, he goes on to become one of the greatest of all justices who revolutionized our understanding of the Constitution and church state and a whole variety of things, the supremacy of the First Amendment and so on. He also named Stanley Reed, a gentleman's gentleman from Kentucky, Felix Frankfurter, who had trained so many of the advisors and staffers in the New Deal. Felix Frankfurter was an immigrant from Austria who came here when he came here, he didn't know a word of English. 11 years later, he was valedictorian of the Harvard Law School. I mean, he was an incredible legal talent. William Douglas. Oh, I want to tell you this one story. We're about out of time, but I do want to tell you a story about the way FDR was. He called up Felix Frankfurter, and he had all along been telling Frankfurter, I really want to appoint you, and he had told William Douglas this too. I really want to appoint you to the Supreme Court, but you know there's a lot of balance questions and political questions. We don't have anybody from the far west. I really want to appoint you. So he calls up Frankfurter's home, and they're getting ready to go out for dinner. And Mrs. Frankfurter is telling Felix, get ready, get ready. He's in his underwear. And the president calls. And Roosevelt starts again on this kick. Felix, I want to appoint you to the court. Yeah, I've heard this before. Nothing would please me more than to appoint you to the court. And Mrs. Frankfurter is saying, he's just telling you the same old stuff. He's teasing you. And just about the time Frankfurter is about to hang up, Roosevelt said, I can appoint you to the Supreme Court, which he did. But Roosevelt enjoyed playing with people. He was quite manipulative in that way. Ultimately, of course, he appoints Robert Jackson, one of the most well-qualified people ever to be picked for the Supreme Court. I'm going to talk more about Jackson and some of his jurisprudence tomorrow. But Jackson had thought that he was going to be named to some other post in the administration. He wanted to go home. He was tired of Washington. But he becomes one of the great stylists that ever served on the court. In the words of Henry Abraham, one of the most perceptive critics of the appointments that presidents have made, one of the greatest. Not as great as Hugo Blanc, but certainly a near great justice. Let me close with the words of a mill worker in North Carolina who wrote to the White House as a result of all these things that we've been talking about. And by the way, the Roosevelt Court saves Social Security. It saves the minimum wage. It never again strikes down labor legislation of consequence.